Hey folks, Lenny Lawson again. Probably the only new car dealer that you know, which is not that big of a deal. But it can be very helpful. And it's my job to prove that every time you listen to me. So that's what I'm going to do today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to continue a trend. I started it last week, and that show was titled, The Used Car That You Should Never Buy. Yesterday's show was The New Car That You Should Never Buy. If you want to listen to those, then just go to Apple Podcast or Google Podcast or just Google the My Car Guru podcast, and it will come up more than likely. So in honor of that trend, I'm going to continue it. But this particular episode is the auto service that you should never do or pay for. Because there's some things that, well, it's basically some behaviors and some strategies that new car dealers are using to boost something called fixed coverage. So what is that? Well, in the typical car dealership, we divide the accounting basically into variable operations and fixed operations. Variable is the sales and new car, used car, and finance departments. Okay? And fixed operation is the parts department, the body shop if they have one, and the service department. Fixed operations in the typical car dealership should cover 75 to 80% of the fixed overhead of the business. So the rent and utilities and all that stuff. There are variable expenses that it's not responsible for. We don't count in that calculation. But you can imagine if you had a really big service and parts operation, really big wholesale parts business that you provided parts to a bunch of different body shops and service departments, independents all over a region, it's possible to push that fixed coverage up to 100%. Matter of fact, we had a dealer in a group that we were in called an NADA 20 group where 20 dealers get together and share ideas and so forth. His fixed coverage was 140%. So in other words, he could not sell a single car and still be very profitable. But the average dealer is somewhere between maybe 70% to, I've actually been in a car dealership or owned a piece of one that the fixed coverage was only 45%, which was awful. I mean, you had to sell a bunch of cars to even get to break even. So anyway, that dependency on the service operations, the fixed operations, has led to some naughty behaviors in the service drive. And that's where I want to focus because, you buy a car like once every 3 to 20 years. You service it, hopefully, on a regular basis. A lot of people defect, right? And they go to an independent shop or they go to a fast lube operation, even when they shouldn't. But they do that because of a couple of reasons. Convenience, access, and they think it's cost. It's not so much cost anymore. But when it comes to complicated repairs, there are certain things that only a new car dealer with a franchise can fix. The independents, the vast majority of independents, do not have the tools to take care of these things. So many customers become dependent on that new car dealer, and I think that's a great place for you to continue to visit because they have the tools and equipment and the training to maintain your car the way it needs to be. And when you sell your car and you can provide the future buyer with a complete list of every time you had a wrench turned on that vehicle, or if you have a out of warranty situation and let's say you're 20,000 miles out of warranty and your engine fails at no fault of your own, you maintain the vehicle properly. If you are nice and if you ask and you report that to customer assistance, go to the dealership and try to get something taken care of. If you were a regular customer of that dealership and had all your maintenance work done there, more than likely the factory's going to step up. They may not pay for everything, but they'll pay for parts. Maybe you pay for labor, or they'll split it 50-50. They'll come up with some type of arrangement with the goal of keeping you as a customer. I mean, let's face it. A lot of people, if you have a major failure with a vehicle, that could cause you to defect from that brand. You have a bad experience. let's say you have to take it in 4 times to get the same problem fixed, and they just never get it exactly right, or they don't treat you right. There could be a lot of reasons why somebody defects from a dealership. And I would defect as well. But one of the first mistakes people make is to start taking their vehicle when it runs out of warranty, taking it someplace else, or while it's under warranty, they start going to the Jiffy Lube or someplace like that just out of convenience. So in service departments, it could be in an independent shop or it could be in a new car dealership. Some of the things that people waste money on in the service department are, first, unnecessary flushes. Now, we've talked about this. Some of the worst dealers about this are Toyota and Honda dealers. They want to flush everything because it's a big profit center for them. But if you look in the owner's manual, the only flush that the manufacturer will typically recommend is the cooling system. Get all the old coolant out, flush it, power flush it, and then put in new coolant. But transmission flushes, power steering flushes, brake system flushes, those are not recommended by the manufacturer and are just simply profit boosters for the service department, trying to get their fixed coverage up. So you don't need to do that. You don't need to waste money on those. I do agree with the cooling system flush. I think that's an essential thing, and I would do that somewhere around 50,000 miles, probably every 50,000 miles. Manufacturer says that your coolant is good for 100,000 miles. Hogwash. Okay, another thing that you should never buy in the service department is too frequently changing your oil. I know that sounds weird. Lenny is telling you to change your oil every 5,000 miles. And that might sound frequent to you. It is very important. That's my recommendation, every 5,000 miles, regardless what the owner's manual says. And I'm not trying to sell oil changes for my competing dealers or any dealer for that matter. I looked at, my brother bought a BMW one time. It said change the oil at 15,000 miles. That's another hogwash. So used to, back in the olden days, back 70s, 80s, even back in the 60s, they said change your oil every 2,000 miles. And that was pretty frequent. Why did it change? How come the manufacturer sometimes says you can change it every 7,500 to 10,000 miles, or when the light comes on that says change your oil? Well, engines today, engineering has been able to manufacture engines that have much tighter tolerances. There is less blow-by. That's something that happens when combustion gases sneak past the piston rings and they get into the crankcase and it dirties up the oil. Oil has less contaminants in it than it used to. It's a more refined product. And they have all these advanced coatings that they put on metallic surfaces. There's better engine cooling now than there was. That's regulated by the computer system on the vehicle. And you got better oil pump designs, better control of moisture and fuel vapor contamination. So basically there's less soot and less carbon entering the oil. And you got better engine management. Before you had none, in the old days. And now you have a computer adjusting the air, the fuel mixture, just all kinds of things, the cooling temperature in the engine. So that's why you don't have to change your oil as often as we used to. But still, if cars sit for long periods of time or you drive the vehicle in a aggressive manner, a lot of starts and stops, it can put a lot of stress on the engine oil where it doesn't protect your engine. So you want to change it like every 5,000 miles, like I say, and get your tires rotated at the same time. It's just an easy way to remember things. But, you don't need to change it too often, and you don't need to wait too long to change it. So I hope that makes sense. Also, they may try to sell you some type of a premium oil, like a full synthetic, when it's not needed. If the engineers that designed your car says that it needs to use a synthetic blend or a conventional oil, that's what you need to use. They're smarter than you are. They're smarter than a lot of people on those forums that try to tell you, go full synthetic, pay $150 to $200 for an oil change, when it's not necessary. Now, my Porsche 911, full synthetic. Certain Japanese vehicles, Korean-made vehicles, Hondas, Toyotas, they like full synthetic. And if they say it, then you need to use it. Okay, I'll be back in just 1 minute. Sometimes it just pays not to believe everything you hear. Do a little research. I tell you what, the best thing you can do is just read your owner's manual. If you bought a used car and don't have one, then you can get one online. They'll send it to you. Somebody, I don't know who they are, but they're available. And you can probably get a PDF version of your manual. Just read the maintenance section. Look at the recommended maintenance intervals, when certain things are supposed to happen, and follow that. And if the dealership that you're having your vehicle serviced at or the independent shop tells you something otherwise, just say, no, I don't want that. I don't need that. I don't need a power steering flush. I don't need a brake system flush. And when you get to 50,000 miles, go ahead and have your cooling system flushed. Well, we don't recommend that one. Just go ahead and do it. Lenny Lawson said to do it. Who's he? Well, he's the car guru, but never mind. Okay, what else? I'm hearing that a lot of people are being told that they need to replace their brake pads and have their rotors turned before they need it. Now, if you're replacing brake pads at 6 to 8 millimeters, just because the advisor says, well, they're getting kind of low, you need to ask them the question, well, how many more miles do you think I can go before it gets into the rivets? And they'll say, well, you probably go another 5,000 or 6,000 miles. Okay, then I'm going to go at least another 3,000 or 4,000 miles, and then I'll come see you. Postpone it if it's reasonable. But see, a lot of these technicians that work in these places, they're paid an incentive for upsells, okay? And if they can get you to buy brake pads more frequently than you need to, then they make more money. I know, it's just the world that we live in. So as far as turning the rotors, if my rotors are nice and smooth, that's what the brakes kind of clamp down on to stop your vehicle. That's the shiny white part that you can see. You have a brake caliper that you can see, and it kind of sits on top of the rotor, and then the rotor is shiny. And if you run your finger on it and it's really smooth, you don't need to turn your rotors. When I say turn them, they take them off the car, they put them on a brake lathe, and they cut off a little bit of metal. They basically are putting a slick surface back on it. And the only time you do that is if those rotors have little grooves in them. If you can fill grooves with your fingernail, you probably need to get your rotors turned, especially if you're putting on new brake pads. You don't put new brake pads on rotors that are all grooved. You just don't do it. But now, if you turn your rotors, if you have them turned once and then you keep the car long enough to get another brake job, you might not be able to turn them again. They get really thin. And when they get thin and you use your brakes and the brakes heat up, then the brake rotors tend to warp. And that's where you feel, when you put your foot on the brake, you feel it pulsating every time you stop. It's very irritating. But that's because that your rotors have gotten too thin and you might have to replace them. But you need to know these things. You don't need to replace rotors or turn rotors if they don't need to be. Ask them if it's essential. Ask them if it will make a big difference. Usually, it won't. But if they tell you they're really badly grooved, then you need to have them turned. Okay, what else should you not pay for? If they're willing to put in a new cabin air filter, most cars have cabin air filters. And that's just designed to filter the outside air so that when you're inside the car, it won't contaminate your lungs. So, you can open your glove box. That's typically where the cabin air filter is. Sometimes they're out underneath the hood on the firewall itself, but usually they're in your glove box or below your glove box. You just open it up, pull the filter out, look at it. If it looks clean, then I wouldn't worry about it. But if it's dark, it's full of pollen and crud, environmental crud, then replace it. But you don't need to pay labor to have that done. Just tell them, I'll buy a cabin air filter and I'll just put it in myself. If they say, ask them how much the charge is to replace your cabin air filter. And if they say, well, the labor's $30. $30? for like 30 seconds of work? No, thank you. Just sell me a cabin air filter and I'll put it in myself. Fair enough? Okay, we'll put it in for free. Thank you very much. But how often should you replace your cabin air filter? That's how often should you replace the filters in your HVA system at home. We replace ours every month, but you don't need to do that in a car. Does it need to be replaced every 3 months, every oil change or something like that? I don't think so. Maybe every 6 months. So it just depends on where you live and how dusty it is. I'm sure if you live in a real dusty state, like I would assume Arizona, Texas, places like that, then, maybe more often. Okay, so another service that you might not want to pay for would be some type of a fuel system service. If you're not having any symptoms, if your fuel economy is just fine, your car's not hesitating, it's accelerating fine, it feels like it has plenty of power, there's no reason to pay for a fuel system cleaning. Now, injectors do get crudded up. There's no doubt about it. But you'll know it. Your check engine light will come on. You'll have your fuel economy will drop. You'll have, some performance-related symptoms. But that's just a service that they like to sell. And it's just something that you need to really ask some more detailed questions whether it's really necessary or not. Again, if it says do it at a certain interval in your owner's manual, then do it. Pay attention to what the engineers say in Detroit or Japan or wherever, Seoul, Korea. But the service advisors, sometimes they are just trying to sell something. Okay, alignment recommendations. Your front end alignment is important. If your vehicle is out of alignment, your front tires are going to wear out sooner than they should. Sometimes they'll wear out on the outside edges, the inside edges, and sometimes it's just a tire inflation issue. Don't let them sell you a $120 front end alignment or four-wheel alignment if the only problem is the fact that your air pressures were low. So that's just something you need to know. They may charge you to put the vehicle on an alignment rack just to see if it's in alignment. And if it is, then, the charge won't be as much. But if they have to make a bunch of adjustments, then it's good that you found that out. So one of the things you can do is go, like my dealership, for example, we have a laser scanner. When you drive into the service drive, it automatically checks your toe in and either your camber or your caster. I can't remember which, but two of the major measurements for alignment. And it measures that, and we don't have to put it on a rack, and it's free. So if you can go to a dealership that has one of those things, then you don't have to pay for an alignment check. And one other area that you have to watch and not pay for, services that you don't need to pay for, is a dealership that is notorious for being parts changers. Now, how do you know this? Well, I guess you could look at their Google reviews. In many cases, this is a store that is really, really fast-paced, and the techs don't want to waste a lot of time fixing things. They just want to replace parts. So you come in with a check engine light, and all they're doing is throwing oxygen sensors at you and PCV valves and all kinds of other things that you don't know anything about, map sensors. And they're not really addressing the problem. I mean, I've seen so many issues where somebody takes their car to get it worked on someplace else, some independent shop, and they can't fix it. And it goes to another independent shop, and they can't fix it. There's my alarm going off. And then they finally bring it to us. We tell them that there's a 1-hour diagnostic charge. They say, that's fine. I've thrown a bunch of money at it already. We hook our computer system up to it. It tells us where to go. We check all the things that they said they thought was wrong with it. None of them are bad wrong. Everything's fine. But there is a problem, and it's because there's a short. Just one little wire that's just not seated good and triggering a check engine light. So I guess the moral of the story is don't go to some shop that's just going to throw a bunch of parts at a problem and not solve it. They clear the codes, they install those parts, you pay the bill, and the check engine light's off. But a week later, there it is again. Car starts running bad, and you get mad. And you go back, and they throw up their hands, and you should have gone to the new car dealership to begin with. Okay, I'll be back in just 1 minute. Okay, here's a fast run through of other things you should never pay for, like nitrogen. You don't need pure nitrogen in your tires. We used to think that that was the thing to do because we were told that nitrogen molecules are fatter and don't leak out as quickly as pure as nitrogen and oxygen combined, which is what we breathe in the air. No, pure nitrogen was a way to keep your tire pressures up. And it did make a difference. I have to say it did make a difference, but what's that worth paying for, really? I mean, is it worth $9 a tire? I don't think so. I think some people probably pay for new tires before they're actually due. Tires age out. You know, if your tires are over 7 years old, you're supposed to replace them, according to the tire manufacturers. But is that just so they can sell tires? I don't think so. I think most of the automotive magazines and the mechanical recommendations that I have seen over the years say that that's a valid thing because rubber breaks down over time. So that's what I go by. I bought a 57 Chevy not too long ago. The tires were put on 20 years ago when the vehicle was restored. I didn't want to be riding down the road at 60 miles an hour in that thing in 20-year-old tires. They looked fine. They had plenty of tread, but I replaced them. And you should too. But if you have good tread depth, I mean more than 3 or 4 30-seconds of an inch, and you can measure that if you have a ruler or a Lincoln penny. Yeah, that's a good use for a penny. Just take the penny, turn Lincoln upside down, and stick his head down in the tread of your tire. If you can see the top of his head, your tires are worn out because that's 2 30-seconds of an inch. There are tread wear indicators in between the treads, and if you're down to that, that's also 2 30-seconds of an inch. Didn't know that, did you? But if they're more than 7 years old, or you're down to the tread wear indicators, or you can see the top of Lincoln's head, then you need to get new tires. Otherwise, keep riding on them. So these are the major ways that people waste money. Another way is just not getting a second opinion if you have a major problem. And I would insist on that. What do you have to pay somebody to come from another shop and inspect a vehicle in somebody else's shop? You know, it's not something that a lot of shops like to do. Shop owners don't want to tick anybody off. But, I mean, if they're asking you to spend $7,000 or $8,000, I don't care. You know, I'll pay them $250, $300 to come do an inspection and give me a second opinion. And sometimes insurance adjusters will do that. They have mechanical repair specialists that you can pay to come diagnose or give a second opinion on a repair. And I don't know what they would charge for that, but that's something that I'm going to be willing to do, especially if I have nobody else that I can depend on. You don't have a guru living in the house. But you do have me. If I can help in any way, you know how to reach me. Text me 423-552-2020 or send me an email to lennylawson2020@gmail.com, and I'll see you next time.